Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. This channel is dedicated to finding out whether I really do know it all or not. Make sure you like and subscribe, and make sure you ask me questions in the comments or at my email address, which is at the end of the video or in the description down below. So either way. All right, in my ongoing series today is kind of a grim one. This one is food security. I've been thinking about doing this episode for a while now, and it's been I just haven't really wanted to research it because it's kind of depressing. But I think it's important, and so I think we should talk about it because it's kind of the elephant in the room, I suppose, with this pandemic going on. The first thing, of course, is what is food security? It's basically just means as long as you know where your next meal is coming from on a personal level, and on a sort of global or regional level, it means that there's a supply chain that provides food and that's consistent and that people can expect it, and that people who live in the first world have always lived with a situation where that kind of supply chain has been very consistent and very assured and very robust. And so it's kind of a scary thing to think about the fact that could deteriorate and could go away or become much more burdened than it is yet. So these are all scary things. Okay, so the first question, of course, is why is it worse now? Because there's a pandemic going on. So that means that everyone is out of sorts. And there's a number of things. Number one, of course, is that people are more worried and panicked, and that causes problems. There's also the potential that it could cause problems to the supply chain on a large-scale level, which means that food could become difficult to purchase, which leads to number three, which is that people panic, and therefore the panic just basically regenerates that cycle, because as soon as you panic, you buy more stuff. If you buy more stuff, you put more pressure on the food chain, and if you put more pressure on the food chain, then you're putting pressure on everything. So it just kind of keeps going. Certainly, we've seen runs on grocery stores recently. Of all the bizarre things, we've seen runs on toilet paper, even though toilet paper has nothing really to do with this particular pandemic. It's not a digestive tract one. So, but regardless, if you go to the store and try to buy toilet paper, it's very difficult to find, or it's out of stock or something like that. So it's for whatever reason, that's just a self-sustaining issue that has been going on. Second of all, now, of course, is that there's a potential for agricultural workers to get sick, or for processing plants, food processing plants, to become compromised or to shut down. According to everything that I've read, and I did read quite a bit of stuff on this episode to make sure I had my research right, food itself is safe. Like, the only possible way of transmitting the COVID-19 disease at this point is for people to touch packaging who are ill or cough on it or something like that, and then you pick it up and you transfer it from the packaging to your mouth or your nose, and then you can get it. But as far as the food itself is concerned, the food is safe. So that's definitely a good thing. That's for sure. Supply chain security versus local security. So local security is just what's around you personally. Supply chain security is what's kind of happening regionally and globally. If you haven't noticed, when you go to the store, much of your food, your produce, everything else is grown elsewhere outside of the country that you live in, whatever country that happens to be. Even when you go to Hawaii, which grows everything, it's a bizarre thing, but there are tons and tons of things that are grown and imported from Mexico and stuff. It's just very weird. But anyway, so for better or worse, the food web is global, and we need to deal with the fact that it's a global web. But first of all, let's just take it on the local level. So things you can do on the local level, number one is you can wash the packaging and groceries when you get home. Certainly you could wear gloves or a mask or something when you go to the grocery store, and then dispose of those, and then make sure you take sanitation precautions, wipe them down. Apparently this virus is not very resistant to things like Clorox wipes and stuff. Good luck getting those, right? But any kind of bleach spray or Clorox spray or anything like that should kill it. So wipe down everything if you're concerned about that, and then just make sure, and you can actually even leave things in the garage for a couple of days or out in the sun or something like that, and it will the chances of having that will go away. The bigger issue right now, and the one that's kind of the issue that I'm focusing on today, is more the regional/global supply chain. That's a much, much more dangerous situation than the local situation. If that collapses, we get no food, right? That's the raw reality of it. That's really, really difficult. As it turns out, as you might imagine, perishable items are much more at risk than imperishable items. So things like bananas and onions and carrots and avocados and whatever you find in the produce section, that kind of stuff is much more threatened because the food web is kind of a just-in-time food web, right? You need to get the bananas from the Caribbean or Mexico or something like that, ship them to Florida, then truck them across several states to Oklahoma or wherever they need to end up, and they need to get there at the point where they're almost ripe. That's much more complicated than like canned tomatoes or canned soup or something, which can sit on a shelf for a year or more. So that is the number one threat. So certainly that would be the thing that would go away first, would be the perishable items. I guess if you kind of want to keep tabs on things, if you go to the grocery store and it looks like perishable items are really in bad supply, you might start to get a little bit more worried. So anyway, hopefully that will not occur, but we'll see. You also have to think about storage. So according to a number of different sources, maintaining at least a 2-week supply of non-perishable food items for your family is the correct amount. That can actually be a bit of a challenge for people who are living paycheck to paycheck. But if you can, I mean, even if it's cheap, like pasta and spaghetti sauce and things like that, just stuff that comes in a jar or a can or as dry goods, something that you could live on. It may not be the most delicious food in the world, but you know, if you have 4 people in the house, then obviously 4 times that amount for 2 weeks. So that's the recommended thing that everybody should do. You should have 2 weeks of supplies in hand at any point, and non-perishable is the preferable thing, obviously, so that you can just keep them on hand. Okay, so moving on, the economic situation. Number one, on the price end of things, prices are going up. There was a 0.5% increase in the United States in food prices just in the month of February alone. That's a pretty significant increase. It's just a basic supply and demand issue. A lot of people are shopping. There's a big pressure on supply. So, of course, suppliers are going to raise prices. That's generally what happens. Also, shockingly, I guess I shouldn't be shocked because I've been going to the grocery store, but food prices have been increasing dramatically over the past several years. There was an 8.1% increase in food prices since February of 2019. So 1 year from February 2019 to February 2020 in the US, food prices went up nearly 10%, 8.1%. That is a huge amount. I don't know about your raises, but I got like this much raise. So food prices are like this, your raise is that much, and you're losing effective purchasing power. As always, the poor are hit the hardest. Gosh, I mean, people who are on fixed incomes. Also think about people who are homeless or literally can't make ends meet without food banks and stuff. Normally, people who would donate or volunteer are kind of in crisis mode themselves, and therefore they're kind of clamping down. And so you may not even be able to go and volunteer at this point in person, right? Because that's a dangerous thing to do. But even donating money, if you've lost your job, you can't really donate money, right? So that's a problem. So, you know, that there's a trickle down to that, is that people who had jobs now don't have jobs. And then they can't volunteer or provide food for people who didn't have jobs to start with, which means it's trickling down. And the people at the bottom of that whole issue are the ones who are in the most danger. So that's very, very stressful and scary to think about people who are very much hanging on before this whole crisis. In addition, of course, many older people live on a fixed income, which means that they retired at a certain amount, and that's what they're going to get for the rest of their lives. And as prices go up, they can't afford to purchase as much stuff. So if maybe somebody retired 10 years ago and they were doing fine, but grocery prices have increased a great deal and utility prices have gone up, et cetera, then suddenly they are unable to purchase food anymore. And that's a very, very dangerous thing because, of course, the less food you eat, if you eat unhealthy food or not enough food, your immune system is weakened, which means that you could get the disease more easily. And who are the people who are the most affected by this disease? Older people. So it's a nasty little cycle. There's also the fact that a lot of older people are unwilling to or unable to go to the grocery store anymore because it's dangerous. And that's a terrifying thing too. So if you have elderly relatives or friends or something like that, and you are able to go to the grocery store and drop off food at their house or apartment, that might be a really nice thing to do, right? To help out in that situation. Moving to a broader perspective, the global perspective is perhaps even more dire. Poor countries, as almost is inevitable, are being hit the worst by this situation. There's less food security in poorer countries to start with. There's generally a weaker medical infrastructure, and there's less of a social net, which means that for people who are on the bottom who are hanging on, there's not things like food or shelter or things like that. So as I said previously, hunger can weaken your immune system, so the disease can also have a worse effect on people in poorer countries. And in addition, there could be long-term crop failure, which could lead to even more recession in those countries, which could lead to more poverty and hunger. So again, it's this nasty little negative feedback cycle that's spiraling down. So I saw this. I also, my son's fiance is from the Dominican Republic. And so it's a little bit closer to home for me than perhaps other countries. But just for example, in the Caribbean, there are a number of poor islands that have just no ability to deal with this pandemic from a medical standpoint, a food security standpoint, and even a security standpoint for that matter. So it's very, very scary when you look at those situations. A bad year crop-wise in an area like that, or people losing their jobs in an area like that who perhaps depended on tourism or something and that's gone away, could just lead to a complete collapse of that economy. And so that would be utterly devastating. Then you've got an entire nation worth of people who are out of luck. Okay, to finish this up with a little bit more of a positive spin, what can we do? Right? The number one thing to do is don't do anything, which means don't panic buy. This is a non-action that you can take. Just simply don't go to the grocery store and buy 10 weeks worth of food and 100 bananas and all of this stuff that you're just going to have to throw away eventually anyway. So don't panic buy. That's the number one thing, because that puts pressure on the food system, that makes other people panic buy, and that just leads to this cycle where everything gets worse and worse. So number one, don't panic buy. The toilet paper situation is a perfect example of that. Don't do that. It's not necessary. Governments could and should step in to freeze prices on groceries and essential items, but I have not heard of people doing that yet. Maybe there are other countries. If there are, let me know in the comments. Certainly the United States has not had the wherewithal to go like, everybody stop, freeze prices so that we don't get out of control here. Okay, the other potential things of what you can do are, if you have the means right now, right? If you've lost your job and you have no money and you're barely hanging on, then, don't worry about the rest of that stuff. But if you have the means, make sure that you do donate to local food banks or volunteer if you're allowed to volunteer in some way. Maybe you can do it virtually. I don't know. But certainly donate to food banks, donate food, donate money, etc. You can donate globally. I know my son's fiance works in a place called Hogar del Niño in the Dominican Republic, and their $10 US feeds one person for an entire week. So, if you gave like $40 to that thing, and I'll try to find the link and put it in the description for you. But if you $40 donation would feed a person for 4 weeks for a full month. So that's a huge amount for a poorer country. So, if you can do that, do that. For the longer term, probably this is something that, governments as opposed to individuals have to deal with, but the food supply chain needs to be bolstered more than it is now. It needs to be more robust. More robust medical systems and social safety nets need to be put in place. What you can do for yourself is grow sales locally and globally as soon as possible after this whole pandemic, or if you are able to, do it while the pandemic's going on to keep the economy churning, right? That's a really important thing. Build in safeguards against future transmission of zoonotic diseases. That would be a really good thing, right? Pandemic teams, disease teams, infectious disease teams is good. Keep global trade open. So don't shut borders down. Try to keep things flowing back and forth. Packages are not causing this disease to be transmitted. That is not happening. So global trade is a good thing, not a bad thing. That's something that's really important. We have a global web of an economy, and we need to keep that whole thing running at this point. And the final thing, this was an interesting article, is to realize that food security is a economic stimulus. So what that means is, if you have food security, if you know where your next meal's coming from, basically, that you're more willing to spend money on other things like, whether it's like a new shirt or travel or buying a new toy or something like that, right? If you have economic security in the sense that you know where your food is coming from, you are more willing to purchase other types of things. And that's really important. That helps the economic stimulus. So keeping food secure, keeping the food supply and the food chain secure is super, super important. All right, and I know that wasn't the most upbeat of episodes and everything, but I've tried to collect a lot of information from a lot of sources and put it into one place. So hopefully you find this useful. If you do, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. And certainly ask questions for me, either in the comments or at my email address, which is drknowitallknows@gmail.com. Until next time, bye-bye.